to the American Museum of Tort Law. My name is Melissa Bird. We're delighted that you could join us this evening. I do want to just encourage everybody to come back and tour the museum and to come on our website, take a virtual tour. We're open Fridays through Sundays for all of our summer hours, and I'm excited to announce our guests for this evening. They include Dr. Charles Bennett, Ed Kahn, who is a drug repurposing advocate. We have author Jack Getman on Zoom and Winstead's own Ralph Nader, founder of the Tort Law Museum. But before we begin our program, I'd like to introduce Lori Fina of Personal Digital Spaces. They are sponsoring this event this evening. Welcome, Lori.
Thank you, Melissa, and good evening, everyone. It's an honor and a pleasure to welcome you this evening in an event that highlights the important work of our friend and renowned pharmaceutical safety researcher and activist, Dr. Charles Bennett. I'd also like to recognize the important role that tort law plays in our addressing the risks and the liabilities presented by new medicines and technologies as they get introduced into our society. The American Tort Law Museum, which is located right here, fosters both education and awareness of the essential legal frameworks that enable safety and accountability in today's society. And frequently, as we're introducing new medicines, as we're introducing new technologies, and we're finding issues as they arise, there are individuals in the organizations that are either researching it or providing it out into society that have that aha moment and they go, there's something wrong here and I need to do something about it. And frequently, these people take personal risks, as we'll hear about in the story with Dr. Charles Bennett, and professional risks to call these things out and work together with organizations and our legal frameworks to address it. So tonight, I hope we can have a really wonderful conversation. I'm going to turn this over to moderator Ed Kahn, who will host the fireside discussion and hopefully really bring this into focus for all of you, that these are also personal stories, as well as issues that are big and make headlines. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ed. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Charles Getman, author on Big Pharma, an expert in law and academia, and he's the former president of the American Association of University Professors, and one of his published works won the Violet Crown Award, nonfiction, In the Company of Scholars, The Struggle for the Soul of Higher Education. And since 1970, he's represented as a lawyer many faculty members accused of academic misconduct, which is certainly part of the story here. Alleged academic misconduct. I feel kind of foolish introducing. I was at a loss for words to how to introduce Ralph Nader, so I'm going to address. I can't see Citizen Nader, but I'm going to call him Citizen Nader. Is that okay with you, Mr. Nader? I can't hear him, so I guess I'm going to have to call.
Okay, you're on, Ralph.
I'm sorry.
Can you hear now?
Yes, I can. Do you mind if I address you as Citizen Nader?
Oh, that's fine. That's
Okay,
fine.
great.
As a Supreme Court justice once said, it's the highest office in the land, the office of citizen.
All right. Well, then I got lucky guess taking that word. He's been an advocate for safety of humankind and the environment, and author, created credible institutions, public interest research group, Center for Auto Safety. I mean, the list, Clean Water Action, the list goes on and on. But I basically think of him as a lawyer for the good, a lawyer for the good. There's so many lawyer jokes. I'm here because I'm Charlie's friend, And after my sister died of lung cancer, I became a drug repurposing advocate. You know, it's new drugs, it's new drugs that aren't well researched, that often side effects start popping up if you look for them. And Citizen Nader and Dr. Getman and Charlie will hold forth on that. How often these are found, how often they're not found, how many deaths result, what happens to the people who are the whistleblower. Dr. Bennett doesn't like the term whistleblower, but it's the familiar term for those scientists, lawyers, business people who find that capitalism and science has run amok. So if I sometimes use whistleblower, Charlie, please forgive me. And I just want to say something just personally before the important gentlemen speak. I'm wearing the hat. Why am I wearing this silly Jewish hat? Well, I'm a Sabbath observer. I don't do this on Sabbath, but there's, and religion has gotten a terrible name in this country lately, as we all know. But sometimes, like capitalism, it does some good. Science does good. And there's an exemption in traditional Judaism that if you're saving a life, all the other rules go out the window. You get a free pass. And there have been literally probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of lives saved by Citizen Nader and Dr. Bennett. So I'm just honored to play a small part in getting these gentlemen to talk about this story. So take it away. I don't know. Maybe we'll start with Professor Getman. Dr. Getman, how did you come to write this book?
The book really began by accident, so to speak. We were on a cruise, and I met Charlie, and he started telling me about his problems in academia. And somehow it came out that I had been the president of the American Association of University Professors, and that I had represented faculty members in trouble or who were falsely accused previously. And when I got home, Charlie had sent me some of the material from when he was accused of violating the False Claims Act. And I looked at it, and there was a complaint alleging wrongdoing on his part. I have read complaints. I was a labor arbitrator for many years, and I know what an allegation of misconduct looks like. And I read this complaint against Charlie, and there was nothing in it that indicated wrongdoing. He had been publicly accused of spending grant money for his own purposes, for his own pleasure, but there was nothing in the allegation against him, nothing that said on this date he spent money at this place or anything, that there was no fact alleged of wrongdoing. So then I got interested in the case because it seemed that what I was seeing was a complaint with very little basis, and that I was well aware this had the potential to ruin a very valuable scientific career. So I got interested and have spent the last several years discovering that, in fact, my reaction was accurate, that there really is no case, and that somehow Charlie is the victim of forces that it's very hard to totally locate, but that there's no basis. And he was accused, and the government, U.S. government, went along claiming that he violated the False Claims Act. But as I said, if you look at the complaint against him, which was signed on by the U.S. Attorney for Northern Illinois, there is nothing in it, and I couldn't understand. But the consequences, I learned very soon. The consequences were very great. That he had, it had a major negative impact on his career and
his finances.
and his ability to continue with the good work which he had done on drugs.
Citizen Nader, I saw it in walking through your incredible museum just before the start of the presentation that you were attacked often illicitly, immorally, illegally by people you were investigating. Have you seen this in medical science as well as in industrial whistleblowing, the assault on the legitimacy of the person who's finding the danger?
Oh, yeah, quite frequently. There are different modalities, however. For example, David Michaels, who is a scientist and was head of OSHA under Obama, he's now at George Washington University, has written a book showing the bogus science and bogus challenges by industry trying to escape accountability for occupational health and safety casualties. One example after another he gives in the book, where they challenge sound science. They hire scientists on retainers, company doctors. So that's one modality that's very, very widespread, where you actually have conventional science behind you. And corporate science, which is quite different from academic science, it's not peer-reviewed and it's profit-driven and it's secret, assails challengers. The second modality is when the FDA colludes or is too concessionary with the industry supposed to regulate. Most people don't know that the FDA's regulatory budget on drug safety and effectiveness is funded by the industry. Congress, under the guise of saving the taxpayer money, authorized setting fees on drug companies to fund the FDA's watchdogging over them. Well, you can imagine how that weakened regulatory resolve and arm's length regulation between the FDA and Big Pharma. And so the FDA, with some dissenting scientists inside FDA, regularly overlooks submitted petitions criticizing pending drug approval applications, like by the Health Research Group of Public Citizen. And once in a while, these dissenting scientists blow the whistle. They're called up to Congress and they commit truth. But by and large, the regulators, some of them have been around for several decades in the FDA, find it hard to distinguish their alleged independence with the pressure and the lobbying and the whining and dining of the Big Pharma petitioners. So that's another modality. The third one is under the federal drug safety laws, all drugs have to be safe and effective for the purposes of their advertisement. Two standards, safety and effectiveness. And our health research group, starting in the 70s, located literally hundreds of drugs, prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs, two separate books, drugs that don't work over-the-counter and drugs that don't work that are prescribed. That either were too unsafe and or ineffective or both. And most of them have been taken off the market year after year. Medical journal articles, public pressure, lawsuits, most of them have been taken off the market. However, Big Pharma keeps coming. Pfizer keeps coming. EJ Lilly keeps coming. They keep coming because when they're caught, and they've been fined hundreds of millions of dollars in the last decade by the Justice Department, settlements, hundreds of millions of dollars, Pfizer. It doesn't matter because it's insurable, it's deductible, and in some cases it's depreciable. So it's the cost of doing business, even though it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And so when the corporations throw this phrase around, sound science, actually they're the major violators of perpetrating unsubstantiated foundational arguments wherever they can. And when they're challenged, they hide under the cloak of the FDA. And it's a very formidable challenge, as Dr. Charlie Bennett knows, to take on the FDA when under its arm is the industry. And that's what this book is about, and in some detail. The burden of proof is always on the regulator. It's not on the challenger, but the regulator, in close association with the regulated so-called companies, basically say, we can't give you information you need to further substantiate your challenge because of proprietary data. It's trade secrecy. And so not only don't they assume the burden of proof going forward, but they keep basic information away from the challenger who has an initiatory case or a probable case to disqualify the sale of the particular pharmaceutical. So it's very important for people to realize that this is a widespread problem. Corporate science is everywhere. It's in the biotech, nanotech, pharmaceutical industry, cosmetic industry. It operates in the automotive industry, and it's to be subjected to severe skepticism because again and again, when the spotlight comes on a congressional hearing or a product liability lawsuit, it does not sustain itself because it's driven by secrecy, profit, and lack of peer review.
Thank you.
I'd like to add one thing, if I may. Citizen Nader commented, which is that academics, people in academic positions such as Charlie Bennett, are particularly vulnerable. One thing is that the universities get a lot of money from big, and so the last thing they want to do is be seen as an enemy of the pharmaceuticals. Plus, the reputation of a scientist can often be ruined, as it almost was in Charlie's case, without having done anything wrong. And so they're very quick to, because they want to stay on good terms with Big Pharma, and because they want their own reputation to remain intact, they're very quick often to act against scientists when there's an allegation of misconduct. And
that's very true. In fact, I hope the book contains information about the 1980 passage of the Bayh-Dole bill, which I begged President Carter in his last days in office to veto. And that cemented the commercialization of academic research being sold or licensed to corporations and brought a lot of professors into conflicts of interest with their principles of academic freedom because they were given a cut of the pie, they were given a share, they were often in joint ventures. And so professors at the same university who took umbrage at all this and challenged the soundness of what was going on were left adrift because the universities are becoming increasingly corporatized, and corporatism is priority over academic freedom and protecting it. And I might say that we've challenged all of these institutions and never have been countersued because we have wall-to-wall lawyers. But unfortunately, professors don't have wall-to-wall lawyers. And if they do retain a lawyer, it's very, very expensive. So we were fortunate in that respect. And our litigation group, I believe, stands ready to help professors in certain situations where they need legal counsel against oppressive corporate forces bearing down on their right of free speech, the right to petition our government for redress of grievances, which is a core section of the First Amendment.
Which of your organizations provides legal counsel?
It's Public Citizens Litigation Group.
And
When they take a case, it's all pro bono.
yes, and the AAUP, I want to add, has a long and distinguished history of representing faculty members using the best academic lawyers in the world, and all of whom act pro bono. And when I was president of AAUP, I was very surprised and delighted that I could call on the best academic lawyers and the best academic scientists to help. But it's a very difficult process. As we started to indicate, the issue is loaded against the academic scientists who are accused falsely. It's a very tough job.
I want to switch the question over to Charlie, because I think all these systemic issues are frightening. But I find it more poignant when you know a person, when you know an individual who's been put under the hammer of all these forces. Charlie, how many people like you? Because I've known you for many years and heard about some of these people. And the book discusses more than just Charlie. How many Charlie Lee Bennett's have been the attempt of crushing and ruining reputation? How often does this happen in medicine and life sciences? Are there 10 of these people like you, or are there 30 over the last, say, 20 years?
It's important to understand that if you're under attack, you're under a lot of stress, never to mention it publicly. You're hoping that you get to move on with your career. So when we talk about underreporting of safety side effects of 1%, we would say, again, on underreporting of people like me, to be about 199% as well. People are not in the, if you want to bring it up and talk about it publicly, you'll never get another job in your life. So the question is, so I've gotten a paper that's published called Davids and Goliaths, 26 people like me from all over the world, 26 very famous people, one who did biops. Of the 26 people in my Davids and Goliaths, 25 of them were full professors, never worked a day in their life after being accused.
So you were one of the lucky ones?
I'm the one who considered, I've never worked a day in my life in a medical school again. I'm in a pharmacy school. I don't see patients with oncology. I'm an oncologist. So how lucky is it that you train at Penn and Duke, University of Chicago, UCLA, Rand, and Northwestern, and I'm not allowed to see a cancer patient or work in a cancer center? If that's considered luck, I've considered, any of y'all who want some luck, I'd be amazed to think about that. As Susan Nader said, suppose you try to go your own way. We try to start with this process when we got charged that we're going to get charged with the False Claims Act. I went out and got a lawyer and give me a bid. I'm ready. I want to fight. This is going to happen. My first bid, $2.1 million down. $2.1 million down. He wanted on the bid. My other option was the university said, Charlie, we're your teammate. We'll pay for your lawyer. And they gave me a lawyer, a little guy, and he supported me with $350,000 worth of bills he sold. Went to the university. Little did I know, he worked for the drug company. He was on the other side. So my lawyer is 100%. And the day they settle my case, there's a notice that Amgen settles a case with the federal government for $780 million, the kind of numbers that Susan Nader just talked about. And the signature on that settlement was the same signature on my case. My lawyer, and the case that I was doing was against Amgen. Everything I gave my lawyer went directly to the company that I was working against. Now, how does that work?
It's, I do have to ask this question. We have a victim, and when I said lucky, you did reestablish zoning. Thank God for that. You kept working. I didn't say you were lucky. I said you were plucky. You were tough. Okay. You continue. You didn't stop with EPO. You didn't stop with EPO. You went on to what's the antibiotics group called? Yeah, like Cipro. Just folks, when your doctor says take Cipro, say, is it really that serious? Isn't there a lot of problems with Cipro or Levac? What's the other trade name? Levac? Levaquin. You ask your doctor. Just my wife writes grant writing for Children's Hospital of Boston, and she knows this stuff, but most people don't know this. So have to be careful. So what I wrote this question down before I got this passion and power restored. What are, if any, the good functions of Big Pharma? How can the wheat be separated from the evil chaff, the good wheat, the healing wheat be separated from the evil chaff, or can it? So it seemed, maybe I wrote down, I guess, a good question. Can it? Does it? Is sometimes, are there good drugs looked at carefully? Is there a decent heart inside of the pharmaceutical industry worldwide? And how do you clean out the evil and keep the good, if that even exists? Who wants to jump on that one?
Well, I'd like to say there's a race to the bottom. That is, racing to the bottom, lowest common denominator of misbehavior or profiteering, is the way for greater profits and bonuses for the CEOs. For example, there's some pharmaceuticals didn't want to go to China, but the ones that went to China had a economic advantage re-exporting back to the U.S. Most people in this country don't know that there are no antibiotics produced in the U.S. They're produced in China, India, Malaysia. The FDA can't exactly send as many investigators to supervise the labs there. 65% of active ingredients in all the U.S. pharmaceuticals are produced in East Asia, and they've exported these drugs. And when you don't have any antibiotics produced in the U.S., that seems to me to be a national security issue. So this is an industry that is driven by the race to the bottom. Anybody who tries to race to the top doesn't produce as many dollars and rewards all along the continuum. Now, obviously, when the U.S. government does research and gives it away through the National Institutes of Health to the big drug companies, huge corporate welfare, in addition to research and development tax credits, this is a very coddled giant industry, coddled by government. And when they give it away, there are no conditions, there are no reasonable price provisions. As a result, they just look around and say, "Oh, this company is pretty expert in marketing a certain cancer drug. We're going to give this clinically tested U.S. government-funded discovered drug to them under an exclusive marketing agreement with no royalties back to the taxpayer, back to the U.S., back to Uncle Sam." So all these perverse incentives are all pulling in the wrong way. They're pulling toward monopoly. They're pulling toward secrecy of data that the taxpayer funded to produce. They're pulling toward minimal taxation of maximal profits. They're pulling toward exporting production to East Asia and other countries that aren't as even as regulated as our country is. So I'm sure when the government discovers a particular pharmaceutical and tests it and gives it to a company sells it. People are helped, and if you look at the COVID situation, these companies are making rapacious profits for something that was heavily researched and funded by the U.S. taxpayer. So obviously, they do sell various drugs over the years that fulfill their purpose of safety and effectiveness. But look out for the new ones that come every year. Look out for the lack of disclosure as to the reactions to these drugs over the first 5 years of their permissible marketing. Look out for what's coming from overseas that's not adequately regulated. I can't imagine why a president of the United States doesn't say, I am going to make sure that critical drugs are going to be produced in the U.S. and mean it. Biden has said it. He hasn't meant it. Obama has said it. He hasn't meant it, including antibiotics. So you can see the power of this big pharma, which has at any given time 500 full-time lobbyists on Capitol Hill, about one for each member of Congress, backed up by corporate law firms, trade associations, pharmaceutical associates back home, and so forth. They're afraid of big pharma.
I just have to insert that I was introduced as a drug repurposing advocate. What the heck is that? But it is relevant, and I don't want to have an ad for my shtick, but Citizen Nader points out, and I'm sure Charlie, Dr. Bennett would also agree, that the scary part is the first few years of the drug. You do some trials, maybe they're good, maybe they're minimally okay. Then, like with Vioxx, you discover, whoops, there's big trouble. Pharma hates what I call drug repurposing. When you get a patent on a compound, a molecule, or a biological entity that cures a disease, you have a patent on that formula. And whether it was funded by the government or corporations, it's another issue. It's severe. But there's a good business model. When a doctor can write off-label, promoting off-label is against the law. People should go to jail. If a pharmaceutical salesman goes to a doctor's office and says, why don't you try this arthritis drug for cancer with no data, that's dangerous. But doctors write, what is it, about 30-40% of their prescriptions off-label in America?
Oncologists are 70.
Oncologists is 70. Now that can be a really good thing. Not when it's promoted for profit, but when scientists discover that the other mechanisms of action that help your asthma, help your child's schizophrenia. That happens. And that's called drug repurposing. Pharma doesn't want to do that because since the doctor can write off label, if they do a trial confirming that the asthma drug works for schizophrenia, everyone will be able to create a generic version because you can't police a method of use patent. Well, how do you know that the doctor was writing it for the original indication? Well, then you'd be violating the other person's patent and you can get sued, rightfully so. You're stealing someone else's intellectual property. But there's a catch-22 against using old drugs for new purposes. Very few people know about this. It's over the last 15 years. There's that famous guy who was in medical school and they read him The Last Rites and he discovered his own cure, Dr. Feigenbaum. And, he wrote a book about it, and Clinton's Global Initiative is funding his not-for-profit called Every Cure. So it's becoming a little bit more mainstream. So you don't always have to use an untested novel mechanism, which might have a hidden danger. You could use an old drug, which has been thoroughly looked at by 30 or 40 years of use. So that's all I'll say about repurposing versus novel drugs. It's a sad conundrum that one is pushed off to the side. I certainly don't know the answer. Well, Charlie, and all three of them. What is the public to do at this point, facing the expense, danger, limited efficacy, and enormous cost to society of expensive drugs? What should the average citizen do to fight back?
Well, fortunately, I work with Johns Hopkins and the Bloomberg School. They're funded by John and Laura Arnold Ventures, and the funding is a grant, which is look at price and access pharmaceuticals, specifically price and access to high-cost drugs. Based on the work that we've done in Hopkins, and by that I mean Jerry, like the chief, Jerry Anderson, and his team, only a very small part. That part of the research that they did, that I'm part of, small, was imported into the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, and that's in 2022. The act was signed, and in that act, it mandates starting in 2024, going to 2026. Two things will happen. 2026, 10 drugs will have prices negotiated by Medicare directly with the drug companies, and the prices will be related to the prices that are European prices.
Really?
Those will be 10 drugs. The first 10 drugs are picked. I have a paper to review now on the drug we think is first, and we think it's going to be first. The second part of the Inflation Reduction Act that Joe Biden passed and that Congress also passed is the Inflation Reduction Act is drug companies that increase the price of their drug faster than the inflation rate will be taxed at 100% of profit. So if you decide you want to increase your price of your drugs, because they've done many price increases, the Inflation Reduction Act will say that you have to give all your income back to the government if you decide that's the way you want to raise your price.
Yes, there obviously are people and groups trying to help ordinary citizens, but ordinary citizens are not in a position really to defend themselves adequately. And they don't have access to legal help, and the laws really need to be re-examined. It's been a long time since laws regulating drugs. It was a long time since the False Claims Act, which is often involved in these cases, has been re-examined. It would be really valuable if you had a expert and nonpartisan group to examine the legal status of the drug industry and the position of ordinary citizens. For example, I looked at the False Claims Act, and it's not a law that I've worked with over the years, but just looking at it in terms of Charlie's case, I realized that it had lots of flaws, and it needed to be re-examined. And I think a re-examination of the laws dealing with drugs would be very valuable now if we could have an group commission form. I don't know really how it would be formed, but there is a need for such an institution, and there is a need for an examination, and it would be good also to inform the public more. You know, every day we are bombarded with drug commercials. That is probably people end up watching more of that than of pro basketball, because it's on the air constantly and they're selling a false picture. And it would be very valuable if people had more of a sense of outrage than they do.
I just want to throw in a small piece of optimism, because it's getting pretty grim, right? And with utmost respect, Citizen Nader, I mean, you've been doing this your whole professional career, but I lived as a small businessman in the technology licensing world of right after Bayh-Dole through 2005, 1986 to 2005. And Bayh-Dole has the fact that you can make money off of NIH-funded research, and the government never gets any royalties from that, is pretty bizarre. But in Bayh-Dole, there is an escape clause, and you would know this much better than me, so I'll just give the rough out for the audience. Bayh-Dole has some margin rights, and veterans are federal employees and federal pensioners. So I was wondering if the margin rights, because one of the other things besides pharma not liking to use old drugs for new indications, which is proven over and over again, faster, cheaper, and safer. It gets into people in 3 years instead of 10 years. It's the clinical trials are 20 million instead of 1 billion. But there's another horrible thing that happens with federally funded research that turns into a drug. They won't, big pharma or little pharma will not license their compound if it's still on patent to someone else to do the research to prove that it works in another indication, because they're afraid that in that clinical trial, even limited, they'll find a negative indication. And that negative indication will go up the chain to FDA, we hope, and that could result in a black box warning or the loss of that 1 in 100. Pharma is not very efficient. That when they hit the home run, they hold on to it for dear life. So they will not even license. I know of a sickle cell neurological pain drug that's approved by Novartis, and it hits a microglial target in GBM. And when I tell the people at the not-for-profits who are completely honest and completely patient-centric, they tell me what I already know from 25 years of doing this. Novartis will never sub-license that for the microglial discovery in Israel that turns off brain cancer is the mechanism of action of turning off the sickle cell intense neurological pain. And they'll never sub-license it. But within Bayh-Dole, if I have it right, there is a thing for margin rights, like patents can be abrogated during time of war, margin rights. So there is a Trojan horse, if you will, in Bayh-Dole, and maybe Citizen Nader can tell me if that is something that he and his people have thought about, not throwing out all of Bayh-Dole, because that's tough to do. And it did do some good. The price is ridiculous.
Yeah, I think.
But what about the
you make a good,
maybe starting with BA?
You make a good point, and not everything in Bayh-Dole is commercially adverse. The government tried to use its patent right just recently against Gilead, the notorious drug company that jacked up prices so high for their drugs, which were nourished by federally funded research. So the government, which started under Trump of all people, sued Gilead, and they just lost before a federal jury in Delaware. The government lost, the taxpayer lost. The pay or die syndrome continues. We have drug companies that develop drugs with huge taxpayer support out of NIH and elsewhere. And these drug companies turn around, and in their gratitude, they charge the American people the highest drug prices in the world. Almost every other country in the world has price control over drugs. You can go to places like Canada and Western Europe and elsewhere, exact same drug for a third of the price, half of the price, fourth of the price. Now these companies are emboldened in the U.S. because the Congress is in their pocket. They're charging $100,000 to $300,000 per patient for some of these new drugs. And so what I would respond in as to what people can do, number one, they could focus on Congress, which upgrade the statutes for drug safety and efficacy and reasonable price controls. Bernie Sanders is the chair of the key committee in the Senate. You heard about his pounding the table against the Moderna CEO recently. Well, he warned Moderna not to increase fivefold the price of its bivalent vaccine above its cost, but Moderna just stood there, took the browbeating verbally, and they're going to go ahead and do it. And so we have to have Congress, only 535 of them. We outnumber them. We've got to form local lobbies in every congressional district. Nothing fancy, but just to show the members that there's a pulse there, and they've got to upgrade the statutes and turn their back on these campaign contributions by the drug companies because they need the votes more than they need the campaign contributions. The second thing can be done is tap into valid data sources that are very, very cheap, like the Health Research Group for $10 or $12 a year. You can have 24/7 access to its database on hundreds of drugs under the rubric worst pills, best pills. By that, they mean all these pills are approved by the FDA. Some of them have much worse side effects than others. Some of them are more effective than others. Ergo, the title, worst pills, best pills. And whether it's 3 a.m. or after you come out of your doctor's office, often doctors don't have a clue about this information. You can check in, and there's reprinted the subscription sheet. For $10 or $12 a year, you have full access to this very accurate database that's been around for over 50 years under the direction of Dr. Sidney Wolf of Public Citizens Health Research Group. The third approach of what people can do is product liability lawsuits. Don't underestimate the disclosure effect in court of product liability lawsuits.
There are two myths. So if you follow Citizen Nader's advice and get involved in this, there are two myths that have been sold and to Congress and to the public. And I just have to jump in and refute them. One is if pharma didn't charge a lot for drugs in the US, they would never be able to face the extraordinary scientific difficulty and odds of ever producing breakthrough drugs. And it's only the US paying that amount that allows them to do it. But if you go home, you go on the internet, there is something called Eroom's Law, EROOM. For those of you who are engineers, that's Moore's Law backwards. Moore's Law, for those of you who know chips and software and hardware, is that chips will get, every year will get twice as fast and 5 times as much information. And Eroom's Law, and this is all over the internet, EROOM. Eroom's Law says the bigger the pharma company gets, the less productive, more profitable, and the volume of profit, the less productive they get. And the chart is amazing. And this is data. Eroom's Law says that pharma isn't productive of producing life-saving medicines at any price. So that's the two myths together. One, that they have to charge a lot or else they wouldn't produce anything. And two, that they're saving our lives every day with their process. So I guess I'm joining with the threesome here. I'm trying to be moderate and be the moderator in the middle, but it's that myth has been sold to the American people.
Well, the data are quite clear that the drug companies spend far more on advertising and marketing than they do on research. And the research is enhanced by tax credits, which is another fancy word for a check from the Treasury Department straight to the drug companies, a tax credit for doing research and development to make a profit. You have to bribe them with another tax credit. Profit is not enough. And then these advertisements, which were once banned, these ads that are on TV, over 30 years ago, they were prohibited. And they're full of emotional appeal, lack of accurate information, deception. The Federal Trade Commission can never keep up. There are other countries that ban ads like that. They have price controls. They ban ads like that. So it is a myth that they have to charge a lot in order to do research and development. A great deal of the basic pharmaceutical discoveries were U.S. taxpayers through NIH. Over 3/4 of the cancer treatment drugs are rooted in U.S. taxpayer R&D. So if they'd spend less on advertising and deceptive promotion, maybe they could spend more on honest development of medical science at their workplace.
It's very starting where we.
I think it would be a good first step to go a little deeper by taking this opportunity to get a copy of Charlie's book. I should say Dr. Getman's book about Charlie's quest, because in it you will see how many lives one person saved. And I think it's really with Epstein. The first of the monoclonal antibody winners that made Amgen a multi-billion-dollar company. How many lives can be saved by having, as Dr. Getman suggested, a commission that would have, instead of those 26 people out there on a professional cliff and a financial cliff all alone, if this kind of knowledge was disseminated by, federal commission, but start with.
But let me just make it.
I really like the book. I've heard this story for the last 13 years that I've known Charlie. I've seen this story, and in its full horror. I mean, I could not believe it as I saw it. I that he's sitting here alive. All right, I'm going to be a little immoderate. That he's sitting here alive, and that his wife Amy has put up with this. These people deserve a round of applause because they have stood by your side. You might not. I went to my 50th high school reunion, and one of those high school couples that stayed married. She was a GI doc, and she died of symptoms caused by her treatment for multiple myeloma. So I read Charlie's book again a little bit more carefully, and I see the embolisms that are caused by thalidomide. A wonderful repurposing story, a horrible drug that caused the FDA to get this big back in 1962, all those babies with no limbs. And I just want to say that I know someone who probably died, a doctor, a GI doc, Harvard educated. She probably died of a stroke from her own oncologist didn't notice, watch out for thalidomide, giving her a VTE. So this could be you or your neighbor. So I just threw away my moderator chat.
Let me just say, as you talk about potentially bringing some books for signing, and to me, it's been a pleasure to be at the museum today and to walk around. I will tell you that if you're interested in buying signed books, Ralph Nader's book is out there, and they are signed. And I will tell you, if you want to buy a book, unsafe at any cost, anywhere else in the country, or at Amazon or any other bookstore, your answer is no. I've done it. I've looked. There are no books out there to be found. There are many books right out there in front. They are already signed by Ralph Nader. I can tell you right now, if it's a once in a life opportunity, I would love to see everybody walk out of here with one of Unsafe at Any Speed and Jack Getman's book, which we retitled Unsafe at Any Dose. And just to remind you, Jack is 93. I think Jack.
No, but close.
A mere child of 92.
And Ralph, I think you just had your birthday. You're just 89. Is that right?
Well, yes.
I hope there's a purpose to.
There's a reason. When I talked to Jack, he looked back at his own biography. He looked back and he'd been at Harvard Law School many years ago, had a 5-year degree because he went to Harvard Law and got a master's. But in the Harvard Law School class he was at, Ralph Nader was in the same class at that time. Not exactly the same year, maybe a year or two off. But it's here we are, and we want to know what was in the Kool-Aid in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let you two guys come up with really what we need.
Not everyone who's smart steals.
Yeah. Well, that is, if you come from a working class tradition and had parents who were strong union people from the start, you have some sense of an obligation to your fellow classmates and to the workers who enable you to live the kind of life that you're living. And I figured I might as well take advantage of this to kind of praise myself. But the truth is that this discussion points out how much of a disadvantage those who are really fighting for the public interest in terms of the creation, more of the sale, the marketing of drugs, and it's really a very important issue and very hard to deal with, The people who create drugs and who work, the scientists who did the work for Amgen, have done great things for everybody. But the people who are behind the selling and the organizing of the company, the people who turn Big Pharma from a scientific enterprise into a powerhouse economic force, they are much less motivated by any notion of serving the
We
public.
have a question from the audience, from Amy.
And I would like to direct this to Citizen Nader, if he could just comment on anything he knows about the COVID drugs and the vaccines and the boosters and all the stuff that's coming out now.
Well, you had an emergency pandemic. People were dying everywhere. So you're not going to get absolute certitude. But from what the Health Research Group said, and they're independent, nobody has their hooks into them. The benefit of taking these vaccines and boosters outweighs the risks. And so far, if we're to trust the various follow-up studies in the last 2 or 3 years from around the world, including countries not under the control of Big Pharma, the benefits exceed the risks.
Thank you for that. Because if anyone is skeptical, it's you, Citizen Nader. That's very, very reassuring to hear.
Well, we have to have stronger whistleblowing laws. We're the prime authors of the whistleblowing laws in the federal government. We had the first whistleblowing conference in 1972, and they need to be strengthened. The Merit Review Board has to be strengthened, protecting federal government whistleblowers. And there used to be a time a whistleblower was considered a snitch, but the Wall Street Journal reported that because of all our work, it's now an act of conscience. It's bringing your conscience to work at great risk to your career, or going into the public arena with truth as you see it, at great risk to your career in terms of the retaliation. That's why it's good to read this book, The Taking on Big Pharma by Julius Gatman and Terry Leclerc.